Tonight, we slip quietly into the golden world of ancient Egypt, where you, of all people, have just been declared Pharaoh. It sounds majestic, doesn't it? Until the crown is on your head and you realize it weighs about as much as a small anvil, and comes with the collective expectations of an entire civilization. Everyone thinks you're the chosen one of the gods. In reality, you're mostly trying not to trip over your own royal sandals while pretending to have divine wisdom. This isn't the glamorous life of glittering gold and eternal sunshine you've been sold. No, this is a relentless balancing act, where the wrong decision might just have half your court whispering about your mysterious illness over dinner, which is ancient Egyptian code for plotting your downfall. I'm the candlelight historian, and this is history as it was lived, unforgiving, unfiltered, and brutally real. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy these late-night dives into the messy side of history. And tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. Now, relax, take a deep breath, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The moment the crown touches your head, the palace erupts with cheers. It feels less like a celebration and more like the sound of the world strapping you into place. You're not just wearing a crown, you're wearing centuries of tradition, unshakable belief, and the heavy sigh of everyone who expects you to solve their problems. Farmers want a good harvest, priests want you to keep the gods happy, and your advisors want you to avoid doing anything that makes them look bad. There's no such thing as a quiet first day. Before you can even blink, someone is already reciting your new list of titles. It takes so long that you stop listening halfway through. Somewhere between Lord of the Two Lands and he who brings the Nile to life, your mind drifts to what you'd actually like to be called, something simpler, like the guy who just wants a nap. The court is full of people watching your every expression. Blink too much, and they might think you're nervous. Smile too wide, and they'll decide you're a fool. A pharaoh is supposed to stand still, majestic and unshaken, like a perfectly carved statue. Except statues don't sweat in the heat or feel the knot tightening in their stomach at the thought of tomorrow's ceremonies. The hall smells like oil lamps, incense, and the faint temps of dust kicked up by the crowd. Everyone expects you to say something profound. So, naturally, you panic. What are your first words as Pharaoh? Thank you, I'll do my best. It sounds like the kind of speech someone might give before starting their first job at a bakery. But no one dares laugh. They all nod seriously, as though you've just spoken timeless wisdom. Then comes the parade. You're loaded onto a ceremonial platform, carried by at least 20 men who are somehow both exhausted and terrified to show it. The sun is blistering overhead, baking your skin like fresh bread. Your new robe is heavy, made of gold-threaded linen that gleams like the Nile at noon, but feels like you're wearing a weighted blanket in the middle of summer. The crowd cheers as you pass, throwing flowers and chanting your name. It would be touching if it weren't so painfully clear that most of them are also wondering whether you'll bring good luck or doom their year. No pressure. The thing about being Pharaoh is that everyone insists you're divine. But deep down, you know you're just a regular human with a fancy hat. You still get nervous before public speeches. You still get hungry, thirsty, tired. And yet, no one can ever see that side of you. The people want a god, not someone who occasionally wakes up with bed hair and a bad mood. So, you hold your head high, smile when necessary, and try not to think about how much your neck is starting to ache under that ridiculous headdress. After the ceremonies, you're escorted back into the palace, which, while stunning, doesn't feel particularly welcoming. The walls are lined with painted scenes of gods and victories, all designed to remind you that failure is not an option. A servant fans you with a massive palm frond. Another pours water over your hands, and yet another adjusts the collar of your robe because apparently, even slightly crooked linen might offend the gods. You can't help but wonder what would happen if you just waved everyone out of the room and flopped onto the nearest cushion. Would the ceiling collapse? Would the gods themselves descend and scold you? Probably not. But the palace staff would definitely faint. Your advisors are waiting, ready to bury you in questions. Taxes, trade routes, temple construction. Everyone wants a decision, and they want it now. You barely have time to taste the fruit laid out in front of you before someone asks whether you plan to raise grain storage quotas. You answer with the first vaguely wise thing that comes to mind. Something about listening to the will of the gods, which seems to satisfy them, mostly because no one wants to admit they don't know what that means. By evening, your crown feels permanently attached to your skull. Your ears are ringing from hours of ceremony, speeches, and court politics. You thought being pharaoh would mean power and freedom. Instead, it's starting to feel like you've signed up for the longest, most exhausting job interview in history, one that never actually ends. Tomorrow, there will be more ceremonies, more meetings, and more people asking you to fix things you didn't even know were broken. For now, you retreat to your private chambers, which are beautiful but strangely lonely. The air is heavy with the scent of jasmine oil, the flicker of torchlight dancing across polished stone floors. You try to take a deep breath and let it all go. But even as you lie back, there's a quiet voice in your head whispering that this is just the beginning. The crown is heavy, and it's not coming off anytime soon. The palace is quiet now, but it's not the kind of peaceful quiet that helps you sleep. It's the thick, suffocating quiet of a place that never truly rests. Servants pad softly through the corridors, their footsteps echoing faintly against cool stone walls. Even when you're alone, you're never alone. Every corner hides another pair of watchful eyes. There's a strange sense that the walls themselves are keeping track of you, silently reminding you that you're not a person anymore, you're a symbol. And symbols don't get to throw their sandals in the corner or complain about how itchy royal linen can be. Living in a palace, you'd think, must feel like winning life's lottery. There's gold everywhere, the ceilings are painted with stars, and even the smallest jug of water has been polished within an inch of its life. But luxury can feel oddly claustrophobic. It's not a home, it's a performance stage, and you are always the lead actor in a play that never ends. Even your personal chambers feel staged, with every pillow placed just so, and every piece of furniture arranged like someone's trying to impress a god. Spoiler: that god is supposed to be you, and you're not impressed. The guards stand outside your door, silent as statues. They're not here for your comfort. They're here because you're a valuable asset that can't afford to trip over a loose step or be surprised by a disgruntled noble with a grudge. You can't just wander down to the Nile at night for a quiet stroll. Every movement has to be planned and approved. Want to look at the stars from the palace roof? Sure, as long as a dozen guards and 3 advisors are there to watch you do it. You have more freedom on a chessboard. There's a throne room on the far side of the palace, but calling it a room is like calling the desert a bit sandy. It's massive, designed to make anyone who walks in feel tiny. The ceiling arches high, with painted scenes of gods and victorious battles that seem to glare down at you. The throne itself is carved from stone and gold, which sounds nice until you actually sit in it. It's cold, hard, and built more for intimidation than comfort. You could sit there all day and never find a position that doesn't make your back ache. But that's the point. The throne isn't for relaxing. It's for reminding everyone that this job is supposed to look impossible, because it basically is. You think about the gardens just outside the palace walls. They're probably the only part of this place that feels alive. Date palms sway gently in the breeze, and water trickles softly through the irrigation channels. It would be lovely to sit there quietly, just breathing in the smell of flowers and damp earth. But the last time you tried that, a group of priests appeared out of nowhere to bless your reflection in the water. It's hard to enjoy a sunset when someone's chanting at you about your divine power to bring prosperity. You'd settle for 5 minutes of silence, and yet, despite all the suffocating formality, there are moments when the palace feels almost human. A servant laughs quietly with another as they pass down a hallway, their whispers carrying like tiny threads of normal life. You catch glimpses of the kitchens, where bakers are covered in flour and actually seem to enjoy their work. It's strange, but you almost envy them. They get to live like real people. They get to be tired without having to hide it behind ceremonial masks. In the evenings, the palace lights up with torches and oil lamps, casting warm gold across the walls. It's beautiful, yes, but also eerie. The shadows are long and restless, curling in the corners of rooms like something half alive. You wonder if any pharaoh before you ever truly slept well in this place. Probably not. The weight of so much expectation doesn't just sit on your shoulders. It seeps into the walls, the floors, the very air you breathe. It's the smell of oil, stone, and anxiety. Tonight, the high priests have arranged a private dinner to welcome you to your role. Which means, of course, that there's nothing private about it. Dozens of important faces sit around the table, each smiling with carefully measured politeness. The table itself is stacked with food that looks beautiful but is clearly designed for presentation rather than taste. Golden figs, roasted duck with layers of spices, tiny bowls of honey, all laid out like artwork. You pick at the food because that's what you're supposed to do. Eating too much would look undignified. Eating too little would offend the chef. It's a delicate game you never asked to play. The conversation is formal, endless, and slightly ridiculous. Priests tell you how radiant you look under the divine favor of Ra, which is a nice way of saying, don't mess this up or the crops will fail. Nobles discuss trade deals and grain storage like they're reading from a script. No one dares talk about anything as ordinary as, say, how hot it's been lately or whether anyone's sandals gave them blisters on the way here. By the time the meal is over, you've smiled so much your face hurts. When you finally return to your chambers, you take off the ceremonial collar and headdress and realize your neck feels like it's been hit with a brick. You think about calling for a massage, but that would involve 3 more servants. And right now, you'd rather just be left alone. You sink into your bed, which is surprisingly firm, considering the wealth around here, and stare at the ceiling, painted with lotus flowers and constellations. Somewhere beyond these walls, the city of Thebes is alive with music, laughter, and the sound of ordinary people living ordinary lives. You wonder, not for the first time, if they have any idea how much easier they have it compared to you. The palace is silent again, except for the faint sound of footsteps in the distance. Maybe tomorrow will feel different. Maybe you'll learn to carry this crown without feeling like it's crushing you. But right now, as the flickering lamplight dances on the walls, you realize something important. Being pharaoh isn't about living in luxury. It's about surviving the endless weight of being seen as perfect, even when you're just trying to make it through the night. Morning begins before you're ready, not with a gentle nudge or a warm cup of something soothing, but with a priest chanting outside your door, calling on the gods to bless the day. You'd think being considered divine would earn you the right to sleep in, but no. As Pharaoh, you are both a god and a very tired human, which means you're expected to rise with the sun, and sometimes even before it. The sun itself is barely peeking over the horizon, painting the palace walls with soft amber light. It would be beautiful if you weren't so busy trying to remember how to open your eyes without groaning like a very mortal ruler. A servant brings a polished bronze mirror to check your face, because apparently being divine doesn't excuse looking like you wrestled a linen sheet all night. They adjust your hair, apply a bit of scented oil to your skin, and straighten the beaded collar that you'll wear for the day's rituals. You don't have a choice in the matter. Looking flawless isn't vanity, it's survival. A pharaoh with a wrinkle out of place might be seen as weak, and weakness is a dangerous rumor to start. Your first duty is to greet the gods, which means standing in front of an enormous statue of Ammon, while priests burn incense thick enough to make your lungs feel like they're full of honey. The statue towers above you, gold-plated and serene, as if it knows something you don't. The priests chant. The air is heavy with the scent of myrrh and resin, and you're meant to stand perfectly still, radiating divine authority inside. You're mostly thinking about breakfast. Being treated like a god isn't as glamorous as it sounds. Sure, everyone bows when you enter a room, but they also expect you to never, ever mess up. If the Nile doesn't flood as expected, people will whisper that you angered the gods. If a drought hits, guess whose fault it is? Not the weather. No, it's you. You're supposed to be the bridge between heaven and earth, which is a poetic way of saying you're held responsible for things you have absolutely no control over. You walk through the temple grounds, your sandals brushing against the smooth stone. The carvings on the walls tell stories of your supposed greatness, but some of them are actually about your predecessors, who, judging by the way they're depicted, never had a bad day in their lives. You know better. Every pharaoh before you has probably stood here, exhausted, silently wondering if they could get away with pretending to faint just to skip a ceremony. By mid-morning, the rituals have only just begun. Offerings must be made. Priests line up with bowls of bread, wine, and fruit, placing them at the feet of the statues as if the gods are about to sit down for a picnic. You nod solemnly, because that's your role. Inside, you're starting to think that the gods might actually prefer a little quiet instead of the endless noise and smoke. But no one asks your opinion. You're the figurehead, the symbol, the one who must look serene while everyone else runs around trying to keep the universe in balance. The burden of divinity, as the priests call it, is really just a fancy phrase for being trapped in an impossible performance. Every action, every glance, every word is interpreted as a sign. If you look too serious, they'll say the gods are displeased. If you smile too much, they'll whisper that you're losing focus. It's exhausting. You find yourself practicing a perfectly neutral expression, one that says, I am divine and powerful, but also approachable and wise, which is harder to pull off than it sounds. When you finally get a brief moment alone, you wander out to the palace balcony. The Nile glitters below like a ribbon of molten gold. Boats drift lazily along the water, their sails catching the early breeze. It should be peaceful, but even here, the weight of your role hangs heavy. You know that people are watching from the city below, craning their necks to catch a glimpse of their god-king. You can almost hear them whispering prayers or complaints, depending on how their day is going. Being the embodiment of an entire nation's hopes and fears is a lot, more than a lot. It's a constant hum in the background of your thoughts, and just when you think you might have a few minutes to enjoy the view, an advisor appears. They always appear. This one clears his throat and says something about trade negotiations with Nubia. You nod, pretending to care, when really, you're trying not to imagine how easy it would be to accidentally drop your crown into the Nile and see what happens. The day continues with more ceremonies. There's one for the harvest, one for the temple's new statue, and one that involves simply standing there while the priests shout blessings at you. The heat rises, the incense smoke clings to your clothes, and the collar around your neck feels like it weighs more every hour. By the time the midday sun is overhead, you're sweating like a mortal, which, of course, you are, but you can't let anyone see that. Later, when you finally sit down for another round of meetings, someone brings up the idea of carving a new inscription about your eternal strength on a temple wall. You almost laugh. Eternal strength. Right now, you can barely keep your eyes open, but you nod anyway, because that's what's expected. That's what being divine means. Pretending you're not slowly melting under all this ceremonial weight. As the day winds down, you realize something rather ironic. Everyone calls you a god, but the truth is, you're living a life with less freedom than any farmer working the fields. At least they can grumble about their bad back or take a break under a palm tree. You're expected to stand, smile, and radiate power, even when all you want is to sit in the shade with a jug of cold water and pretend you're invisible. The palace grows quieter as evening falls, but you know this calm won't last. Tomorrow there will be new rituals, new expectations, and new ways to remind you that divinity is just another word for being endlessly on display. The sun hasn't even fully set, and yet the ceremonies keep coming. Being pharaoh means living in a world where celebrations and rituals bleed into each other. Like a never-ending parade of incense smoke and polite applause. Tonight, you're scheduled for a temple procession, which sounds simple enough. Walk, wave, look divine, but in practice, it's an exhausting marathon of standing still, looking serene, and pretending you aren't thinking about how much your feet hurt. Your attendants dress you in layers of ceremonial linen, wrapping you so tightly it's like they're trying to preserve you for the afterlife while you're still breathing. The collar they place around your neck is heavy with beads, gold, and the general weight of other people's expectations. A headdress crowns your head once again, and you catch a glimpse of yourself in a polished bronze mirror. The reflection staring back looks every bit the living god, poised, radiant, untouchable. Inside, you feel like someone who'd rather be sitting in loose cotton, eating figs by the river, and complaining about the heat like a normal person. As you're led to the temple courtyard, the evening air wraps around you like warm silk. Torches line the stone pathway, their flames flickering in the breeze. The scent of incense hits you before you even arrive, a thick, sweet mix of frankincense and myrrh that clings to your skin. It's supposed to smell divine, but after hours of breathing it in, you're starting to think the gods might prefer fresh air. The priests begin the chanting, their voices rising in perfect rhythm, echoing against the temple walls. The sound is hypnotic, like waves crashing on a distant shore, but it's also endless. You stand still on the platform as the people bow, and you realize this ceremony is less about honoring the gods and more about reassuring everyone that you're still the chosen one, still the steady center of their fragile world. You lift your hand slightly, the simplest gesture, and the crowd responds as if Ra himself has nodded at them. You almost laugh at the absurdity of it, but you manage to hold your regal expression. Ceremonies like these aren't just about religion, they're about politics too. Every noble in attendance is watching you with hawk-like precision, scanning for the slightest slip, Did you hold the staff correctly? Did you pause at the right moment? If you so much as sneeze, someone will claim it's a bad omen. It's like living your life under a microscope. Only the microscope is on fire, and the people holding it are all plotting to see who gets your job when you mess up. Midway through the ceremony, a servant hands you a cup of wine. It's sweet and spiced, but you have to sip slowly, not because you don't want more, but because someone will write a poem about how your third sip symbolizes divine patience. Even drinking water here feels like a staged event. You can't simply gulp it down. You have to raise it like an offering, take a slow, meaningful sip, and look like you're communing with the spirits of your ancestors. In reality, you're just thirsty. The processions move from one temple chamber to another, each room filled with statues of gods staring blankly ahead. You sometimes wonder what those stone eyes would see if they were alive. Maybe they'd roll them at how seriously everyone is taking all this. The priests bow, the nobles whisper, and the scribes take notes like everything you do is the stuff of legends. You know what's not legendary. The way your feet are starting to feel like they've been replaced with slabs of limestone. Hours pass like this, but time during ceremonies doesn't feel normal. It stretches and slows, like the universe has decided to watch you sweat in slow motion. By the time the last chant fades and the last offering is placed, you're standing in a haze of smoke and candlelight, unsure if your knees will forgive you. You manage to keep your posture straight as you walk out of the temple, though you're sure you leave behind a small puddle of sweat on the polished floor. Back in the palace, the servants immediately swarm to help you out of the ceremonial garb. The beaded collar comes off, and you can finally take a deep breath without feeling like you're being strangled by fashion. The headdress is removed, leaving your scalp tingling. You almost want to hug the servant who brings you a simple linen robe, soft, light, and blissfully plain. For a few moments, you feel almost human again. Of course, that moment doesn't last. Before you can collapse onto your bed, an advisor knocks to remind you that tomorrow's ceremonies start even earlier. Apparently, the Temple of Horus needs a special blessing, and you'll be leading another procession. You nod, pretending you're thrilled about it, but inside, you're quietly asking yourself how many blessings one kingdom actually needs. You sit by the open window for a while, looking out over the city. The streets are dark now, lit only by scattered oil lamps. Somewhere in the distance, you hear music, the faint, joyful sound of people celebrating something, or maybe just surviving another day. It's a sharp contrast to the stiff, scripted events you endure daily. They're out there laughing, eating, living their lives. Meanwhile, you're up here, trying to remember whether it's appropriate to smile at your own reflection in a ceremonial pool. The night breeze brushes against your skin, and for just a moment, you allow yourself to imagine what life might be like without all this. No crown, no ceremonies, no endless chants, just quiet, just freedom. But then you hear the sound of sandals scuffing outside your door. Another guard, another reminder that you belong to this role now. There's no stepping away from it. Not really. You close the shutters, take one last deep breath, and prepare yourself for whatever endless rituals tomorrow will bring. After all, being a living god means never admitting you're tired, even when you're absolutely exhausted. Morning arrives with yet another line of servants bustling in and out of your chambers, carrying trays of what they call breakfast, but feels more like a theatrical display. There's a platter of figs arranged in the shape of a lotus flower, honeycomb gleaming like captured sunlight, and bread baked so precisely that you're almost afraid to eat it. You glance at the spread, knowing that somewhere, someone spent an entire night just to make it look perfect for your divine appetite. The truth is, you'd rather have something simple, maybe some fresh dates and a jug of cool water. But simplicity doesn't make good palace gossip. Every meal you eat is a statement. The royal diet is supposedly the best the kingdom has to offer, but it's not as indulgent as it appears. Your portions are carefully chosen, balanced like some sacred equation meant to show restraint and grace. Too much food, and the scribes will whisper about greed. Too little, and the priests will declare you're rejecting the blessings of the gods. You nibble on a piece of bread dipped in honey, trying to look thoughtful, as if every bite is a spiritual experience. The taste is rich and sweet, but all the ceremony surrounding it makes you long for the kind of casual meal you imagine the boatmen have, tearing into a loaf of bread without worrying whether the gods approve. Wine is served, but you can't drink freely. A pharaoh doesn't get to enjoy a glass without meaning. A single sip must be slow and deliberate, as if the entire kingdom's future is hidden at the bottom of the cup. The servants watch for your reaction, probably ready to declare that the wine is divine because you swallowed it with the right level of dignity. You wonder if they'd say the same if you accidentally choked on it. Food in the palace isn't just about nourishment, it's part of your image. Dishes are plated to show abundance, as though you're personally responsible for the fertility of the land. And, in a way, you are. If the Nile floods correctly, everyone thanks your divine favor. If it doesn't, they'll start blaming the way you stirred your soup. It's both flattering and absurd. Every time you pick up a fig, someone will write about it like it's a sign from the heavens. When the meal is finished, or, rather, when you've politely sampled enough to avoid scandal, you're expected to take part in another small ritual. The priests approach, carrying bowls of scented oils, and they bless the food you didn't even eat, thanking the gods for your meal. The irony of this isn't lost on you. The food is now considered sacred and is carefully carried away, most likely to be eaten by the servants later. You can't even sneak a snack later without someone turning it into a prophecy. After breakfast, there's another discussion about what you can and can't eat. One of the palace healers informs you that too much meat will disrupt your divine balance, which is a fancy way of saying it might upset your stomach. Another insists you need more honey in your diet to maintain divine energy, which sounds like an excuse for them to raid the royal honey stores. Everyone has an opinion on your meals, but no one asks what you actually want. Occasionally, you're presented with delicacies brought from faraway lands. Exotic spices, dried fruits, or strange cheeses that have been traded at great expense. You're expected to taste them, nod approvingly, and say something inspiring like, "This pleases the gods." In reality, you're mostly thinking that it tastes fine, but nowhere near as good as the fresh dates grown just outside the city walls. Food is also a political tool. Tonight, you're scheduled for a banquet with visiting nobles, which means hours of sitting at a table while dishes are paraded out like trophies, each one designed to show off the wealth of your kingdom. There will be roasted ducks, spiced lentils, platters of pomegranates, and wines poured from jars sealed with gold. It sounds decadent, but all you'll be doing is pretending to enjoy small bites while listening to someone drone on about the state of the southern trade routes. When the banquet begins, the dining hall is alive with color and sound. The walls are painted with bright scenes of harvests and feasts, as if to remind everyone that prosperity is literally part of the decor. Musicians play gentle tunes, their harps and flutes filling the air with soft melodies that almost make you forget how stiff your ceremonial collar feels. You sit at the center of the table, flanked by advisors and foreign dignitaries, all of whom are waiting for your opinion on everything from the flavor of the lamb to the success of the last military expedition. It's not dinner, it's politics with better tableware. By the time the banquet ends, you've barely eaten enough to call it a meal. The plates are cleared, the musicians bow, and the nobles leave with the look of people who've just attended something important, even if all that really happened was a lot of nodding and polite smiling. You return to your chambers, the faint smell of spices still clinging to your robes, and find yourself wondering what it would be like to just eat alone without an audience, without a scribe ready to record how many figs you ate and what it means. In the quiet that follows, you peel off the ceremonial layers and sit by the window. The city smells faintly of cooking fires, and somewhere below you can almost picture a fisherman's family eating a simple stew by the river. No golden bowls, no anxious advisors, just warm food, laughter, and the sound of the night breeze over the Nile. Somehow, that sounds far more divine than anything served on a golden plate. Night falls, but rest isn't guaranteed for a pharaoh. Your bed is impressive, carved from polished wood with inlays of gold and ivory, and draped in fine linen sheets that look like they belong in a palace, because, well, they do. But none of that matters when your head touches the pillow and the palace refuses to let you sleep. The moment you try to relax, someone knocks on the door. An advisor has urgent news, which usually means a minor disagreement about grain storage, or a priest who insists a certain constellation looks slightly wrong tonight. You nod, pretend to listen, and silently count the minutes you could have spent sleeping when they finally leave. The palace settles into its nocturnal hum, a mix of distant footsteps, murmured voices, and the creak of wooden doors as guards change shifts. Even the walls seem to sigh, as if they're aware of the weight you carry. You roll over, close your eyes, and try to drift off, but the day lingers in your mind like smoke. Every decision, every ceremony, every forced smile replays on a loop. Being pharaoh isn't just a job. It's an endless performance that doesn't pause when the sun sets. The bed itself isn't the cloud-like haven you might expect. The mattress is firm, almost too firm, stuffed with reeds and covered with linen that scratches ever so slightly against your skin. It's not uncomfortable, exactly, but it feels like a bed meant for someone who isn't supposed to show weakness. Even while sleeping, a servant offers to bring fresh lotus-scented oil to calm your spirit, but you wave them off. The last thing you want is to smell like a temple offering while you're trying to rest, and then there's the heat. Even at night, the air feels thick and heavy, as if the sun's warmth lingers just to test your patience. A servant fans you from the corner of the room, but it's never quite enough. You shift, hoping for a cooler patch on the sheet, and instead, feel the beads of sweat forming along your neck. It's not exactly the regal image of a sleeping god that everyone imagines. In fact, it's more like trying to nap inside a clay oven. Of course, sleep isn't just interrupted by discomfort, it's also by politics. Messages arrive at all hours. A runner bursts in to announce that a noble from Upper Egypt has sent a gift, which is ancient code for he's testing your loyalty. Another report comes in about a minor dispute over temple funding. None of this can wait until morning because, apparently, the kingdom would crumble if you had 8 uninterrupted hours. So you sit up, listen to the endless updates, and issue decisions that are written down as if you're handing out divine wisdom. In reality, you're mostly muttering, "Fine, just handle it," while thinking about how much you miss being horizontal. There's also the quiet paranoia that comes with being pharaoh. Everyone says you're chosen by the gods, But not everyone agrees with that choice. Somewhere in the shadows of the palace, someone is probably plotting, or at least whispering about whether your latest temple ceremony was as impressive as your predecessors. You start to notice every creak in the floorboards, every flicker of torchlight, wondering if it's just the wind or something less innocent. It's hard to sleep when half your brain is convinced you'll wake up to a coup. Sometimes you dream of the outside world, the fields along the Nile, the small villages, where life is simple and predictable. You imagine lying under the open sky with no walls, no guards, no endless whispers about divine duty. Just the sound of crickets and the cool night air. But the palace has no such simplicity. Here, even your dreams feel like they're being judged for symbolism. Around midnight, another servant enters, silently setting down a jug of cool water and a bowl of dates. You take a sip, feeling the chill of the water on your throat, and for a brief moment, there's peace. Then, the priest assigned to observe your spiritual well-being asks if you need a blessing before you return to sleep. You politely decline, because the only blessing you want is silence. Eventually, you doze off, but it's not the deep, restful kind of sleep. It's the kind where every sound jolts you halfway awake, and your mind drifts between dream and duty. You dream of walking along the Nile, only to wake and find you're still tangled in ceremonial linen, your head heavy with thoughts of tomorrow's rituals. When dawn finally comes, you feel more tired than when you lay down. The fan has stopped, the oil lamps have burned out, and the crown will soon return to your head, whether you're ready or not. Being Pharaoh, it seems, means even sleep belongs to someone else. It's borrowed time, borrowed peace, and always interrupted by the hum of a kingdom that doesn't care whether you're exhausted. The only thing you can do is stretch, rub the stiffness from your shoulders, and prepare for another day of ceremonies, meetings, and endless reminders that being divine isn't nearly as restful as it sounds. Dawn breaks, and with it comes the faint drumming of distant feet. A quiet reminder that peace never lasts long when you're Pharaoh. Before the sun is fully up, your advisors are already at your door, their faces arranged into masks of concern. Something about a rumor in the south, a possible uprising among workers building a new temple, or maybe just another noble testing. How far he can push the throne before you push back. It's too early for all this. But as the supposed living god of Egypt, you can't exactly roll over and tell them to deal with it themselves. The truth is, being Pharaoh is less about ruling, and more about constantly watching for cracks in the kingdom. Even the smallest ripple of discontent has to be addressed before it grows into a wave. You step out onto the balcony, looking over the city with its sun-bleached rooftops, and the Nile glinting like a snake in the distance. Somewhere out there, someone is grumbling about taxes, or how their crops aren't growing, or how your new temple design is too extravagant. They don't complain directly to you, of course. They complain to their neighbors, who complain to someone else, until the whispers drift through the palace like smoke. Those whispers are what keep you up at night. This morning, a messenger arrives from the outskirts of the city, breathless and covered in dust. He bows so low you wonder if his forehead might leave a permanent mark on the floor. His message: a minor village is refusing to send grain, claiming the harvest was too poor. It's not an outright rebellion, but it's a flicker of defiance. And everyone in the room turns to you as though you're about to call down lightning bolts. You nod slowly, pretending to be calm, though in your head you're thinking, great, another problem I didn't ask for. You give the order to send more grain from storage, a move that makes you look generous and godlike, but in reality, It's just a quick way to stop the complaints before they grow teeth. And then there are the nobles. Oh, the nobles. Every single one of them is both loyal and not loyal. Depending on how much they stand to gain, they smile when they bow. But behind the smile is the thought, what's in this for me? You meet with them in the audience chamber, where the floor is polished to a mirror-like shine and the air is heavy with perfume. One noble complains that his land is being unfairly taxed. Another hints that maybe he could manage the temple construction better than your current overseers. It's all polite words and subtle games, but make no mistake, this is where power struggles are born. If you look tired or distracted, they'll notice. If you look too stern, they'll say you're unapproachable. It's a balancing act on a tightrope, made of gold. Rebellion, of course, isn't just an internal threat. Beyond the borders, rival kingdoms wait like jackals, always testing for weakness. Your advisors speak of Nubian scouts spotted too close to the southern fortresses, and whispers of raiders in the Sinai desert. You're expected to address these threats with decisive authority, but war is costly in grain, in labor, and in peace of mind, so you nod and say something vague about consulting the gods, which usually buys you at least a day of silence. What's ironic is that everyone sees you as untouchable. But the truth is, you're never more vulnerable than when you're sitting on that golden throne. Every decision you make ripples outward, touching thousands of lives, and not everyone agrees with your choices. There's always someone who thinks they could rule better, and sometimes they're bold enough to try. You can't help but remember stories of past pharaohs, those who were mysteriously poisoned or betrayed by people they trusted. It makes every smile feel just a little too sharp, every polite nod just a little too rehearsed. By midday, the heat is brutal, and the tension in the palace feels heavier than the air itself. You take a moment to sit in the shade of the inner courtyard, sipping cool water while scribes read reports aloud. The sound of the fountain is soothing, but even here, the conversation turns to security. An advisor suggests increasing the number of guards during ceremonies. Another recommends tightening restrictions on who enters the palace grounds. You nod, but internally you're thinking, if this place gets any more guarded, I'll need permission just to visit my own garden. The thought of rebellion lingers like a stubborn shadow. It's not just the nobles or the villagers or the foreign kingdoms. It's the constant awareness that power is fragile. You're supposed to be the living embodiment of order, but even a god-king can't keep every grain of sand in place. You try to focus on the here and now, the cool water on your tongue, the breeze whispering through the palms, but the weight of expectation presses in from all sides. When night finally falls, you find yourself back on the balcony, looking out over the darkened city. From here, the streets look calm, dotted with the faint glow of oil lamps. You know that beneath the stillness, life goes on. People barter, argue, laugh, and pray, all under the watchful shadow of your name. You wonder if they see you as a person, or just as a symbol, a face carved into stone that has nothing to do with the real, exhausted figure standing here. Maybe both. You take a deep breath, letting the warm night air fill your lungs, and remind yourself of something important. You can't stop every whisper, every rumor, or every grumble. All you can do is stand tall, keep the illusion of divinity alive, and hope the walls of this palace hold strong for one more day. Because, as Pharaoh, your crown is both a shield and a target, and no one ever tells you how heavy that really feels until you're wearing it. You wake the next morning to the sound of raised voices, not from the city or the guards, but from inside your own palace. That's when you remember the other constant headache of being pharaoh: your family. In theory, the royal family is supposed to be the picture of unity, the perfect model of divine order. In practice, it's a collection of strong personalities, competing ambitions, and quiet plots that make palace life feel more like a never-ending drama than a divine dynasty. Your siblings, cousins, and even some of your own children have their own ideas about how the kingdom should be run, or, more accurately, how they should be running it. There are those who smile at you in public, dripping with loyalty, but whose eyes tell another story entirely. They know the throne isn't just a seat. It's the center of power, wealth, and influence. And while you're wearing the crown now, some of them seem to believe it's only a matter of time before it should pass to someone else. Family dinners would be more comfortable if everyone wasn't secretly wondering who might poison whose honey cakes. This morning's argument is between two of your half-brothers. One is loudly insisting that his land rights have been ignored, while the other claims he was promised a position at a temple that never materialized. It's the kind of dispute that doesn't really matter, but will spiral out of control if you don't intervene. So you step into the room, everyone falls silent, and suddenly they're all smiles and bowing heads. You issue a calm, vague judgment that's meant to settle things without actually promising anything. A skill you've mastered since becoming pharaoh. It works, but only for now. Family politics are some of the most exhausting parts of ruling. Your own marriage, for example, isn't about love so much as alliances. You didn't marry because you wanted to. You married because it made the gods and the nobles happy. Your queen is beautiful, poised, and intelligent, but she's also fully aware of the power her position gives her. When she looks at you, you can't always tell if she's admiring her divine husband or calculating how to outmaneuver half the court. Either way, she knows exactly how to hold the room with a single glance, which is both reassuring and slightly terrifying. The children, on the other hand, are a mix of pride and potential chaos. The heir is already being trained in the arts of diplomacy, war, and looking divine at all times. But he's also a teenager, which means he occasionally rolls his eyes during ceremonies. That's a scandal waiting to happen. The younger ones, still running through the palace halls, don't understand the heavy weight of their lineage yet. You envy them a little. Their laughter is one of the few genuine sounds in this place. Asterisk as the day unfolds. You're reminded of how fragile family alliances can be. The palace is full of whispers, especially among the servants, who hear everything. A cousin is rumored to have been speaking with foreign envoys. An uncle is apparently buying loyalty from lower-ranking officials. None of this is confirmed. But in a palace like this, rumors are like smoke. If you see enough of it, there's probably a fire somewhere. You keep your composure, but deep down, you know trust is a rare commodity here. Later, there's a family gathering, which is just another term for a carefully staged photo opportunity. Except the photo is a wall carving that will outlive you. You all sit together, dressed in coordinated linen and jewels, smiling like the very picture of harmony. Sculptors will immortalize this moment, ensuring that future generations believe you are a loving, perfect family with no arguments whatsoever. If only they could hear the passive-aggressive remarks being exchanged between smiles. Meals with your family are an event in themselves. Tonight, the dining hall is set with gold plates, and the food is as extravagant as ever. Your queen sits to your right, elegantly silent but clearly aware of every word spoken. Your siblings and cousins take turns telling carefully rehearsed stories meant to remind everyone how loyal and indispensable they are. You nod politely, even laugh at the appropriate moments, but in the back of your mind, you're cataloging every veiled comment and sideways glance. It's a game of survival, and everyone is playing. After dinner, you retreat to a smaller chamber with your queen, who has the uncanny ability to summarize the mood of the entire table in a single sentence. She reminds you which cousin is trustworthy, very few, which uncle is too ambitious for his own good, and which servant might have overheard too much. Her insight is sharp, and though you don't always agree, you know you'd be lost without her ability to navigate this labyrinth of egos. As the palace settles into night, you find yourself thinking about how strange it is to live surrounded by people you can't fully trust. Family is supposed to be your closest bond, yet here, it feels like another arena where power is constantly shifting. The irony doesn't escape you. You're worshipped by an entire kingdom, yet you can't have a simple conversation with your own relatives without wondering if there's an agenda hiding behind their words. You return to your chambers, the muffled sound of your children's laughter fading down the hallway. For a brief moment, you let yourself relax, imagining what it would be like to have a family without politics, without alliances, without the constant undercurrent of competition. But you know that's not how this world works. In the palace, family isn't just family, it's strategy, wrapped in silk and gold. Privacy. The word doesn't even mean anything here. In the palace, solitude is as rare as rain in the desert. Everywhere you go, someone is watching, serving, bowing, or quietly waiting for you to speak. Even when you're alone in your chambers, there's usually a servant lurking just outside the door, ready to jump in the moment you so much as sigh. Being Pharaoh means you are never really off stage. Your life is a performance, and everyone is in the audience, whether you like it or not. Take bathing, for example. A bath isn't a private affair where you can soak quietly and let the day slip away. No, it's a carefully orchestrated event. Servants carry in jars of scented oils, towels, and warm water. Someone fans you to keep the air cool, while another scrubs your arms with a mixture of sand and perfumed soap. You sit there, pretending to enjoy the experience, while inwardly wishing everyone would just leave so you could splash around, like a normal person without someone analyzing whether you're cleansing your divine energy properly. Even your wardrobe changes are a public spectacle. Each morning, several attendants gather to wrap you in fresh linen, layering and folding it just so. They take their time, not because they need to, but because dressing the pharaoh is like preparing an offering to the gods. They hum softly, adjust the fabric for the 10th time, and nod at each other as if they've accomplished something profound. Meanwhile, you stand there like a slightly bored mannequin. It's not just the servants who invade your space. Advisors and priests seem to appear out of thin air, always with questions or demands. You can't enjoy a quiet moment on the palace balcony without someone coming up to discuss temple schedules or tax records. A single glance at your face can send them into a frenzy. Did you frown? That must mean the gods are angry. Did you smile? Clearly, it's a sign of divine approval. Sometimes you want to tell them that maybe, just maybe, you're just thinking about nothing at all. But no one wants a pharaoh who's simply daydreaming. The palace itself is enormous, yet somehow it feels smaller because of how crowded your days are. The corridors echo with footsteps. The courtyards are always full of people tending to gardens, carrying offerings, or preparing ceremonies. You try to find a corner to yourself, but there's always someone dusting a statue or arranging flowers to keep the spirits pleased. Even the gardens, with their sweet smell of lotus flowers and papyrus reeds, aren't a sanctuary. Priests stroll there too, murmuring prayers, ready to pull you into yet another moment of divine reflection. And then there's the constant sound of footsteps following you. Guards trail behind, their sandals brushing against the stone floors in perfect rhythm. It's not that you don't appreciate their presence, you understand the need for protection. But after a while, it starts to feel like being shadowed by overly serious ghosts. If you walk faster, they walk faster. If you stop, they stop, staring at you with polite, unblinking expressions that suggest they'd rather be anywhere else, but also will never leave. Sometimes, you try to escape. You slip into one of the lesser-known corridors, hoping for a moment of peace. But the palace is like a living creature. It knows where you are. Before long, someone finds you, bows, and says, "The priests are waiting," or your advisors request your presence. It's as if the walls themselves conspire to keep you from ever being truly alone. Even meals offer no privacy. While you sit at the table, servants stand by, ready to refill your cup or adjust the dishes, as if the fate of the kingdom depends on whether your wine glass is exactly 3/4 full. You try to ignore the sensation of being watched, but it's hard to enjoy a bite of bread when someone is silently analyzing how you chew. The irony of it all is that everyone assumes the pharaoh lives in absolute freedom, yet you, of all people, are bound the tightest. Your days are scripted, your movements are choreographed. Even your silences are interpreted as messages from the gods. You long for a single evening where you could sit by the riverbank, feet in the water, without a dozen attendants hovering like anxious bees. Late at night, when most of the palace is asleep, you sometimes wander quietly to the rooftop, where the stars spread out across the sky like scattered jewels. Up there, with only the soft hum of the wind, you feel a tiny slice of freedom. But even then, a guard inevitably appears at a respectful distance, pretending not to watch you while definitely watching you. You sigh, leaning against the cool stone ledge, and think how strange it is that the most powerful person in the land has less privacy than a farmer bathing in the river. It's not that you dislike the people around you. Most of them are just doing their jobs, trying to keep the palace running smoothly. But the constant presence, the endless eyes, the feeling that every breath you take is being observed, it wears on you. Sometimes you imagine what it would be like to vanish into the city for a day, dressed as a commoner, walking through the bustling markets without anyone recognizing you, just blending into the noise and chaos, buying fresh bread with your own hands. It's a fantasy, of course. The reality is that you'd probably be caught within 10 minutes, dragged back to the palace, and scolded for endangering the divine balance of the kingdom. For now, you settle for the next best thing. A few quiet moments behind closed doors, away from the ceremonial oils and endless chatter. You close your eyes, take a deep breath, and pretend, just for a heartbeat, that you're free. Being treated like a god doesn't mean your body cooperates like one. In fact, you're starting to suspect that your mortal frame is quietly plotting against you, for all the jewels and gold that surround you. There's no escaping the aches and pains that come from wearing heavy ceremonial collars, standing for hours in the blazing sun, or pretending to enjoy long temple processions while your lower back screams in protest. The truth is, pharaohs might be wrapped in divine titles, but their bones and joints are just as human as anyone else's. The palace physicians are a curious bunch. They arrive with baskets of herbs, clay jars of unidentifiable pastes, and a confidence that far outweighs the actual effectiveness of their treatments. If you complain of a headache, they insist on massaging your scalp with oils that smell like crushed onions mixed with desert sand. If your stomach feels off, They whip up potions so bitter you wonder if they're just testing your patience. The physicians speak in whispers, using words like balancing the spirit and realigning your divine essence, which is their way of saying, we have no idea if this will work, but drink it anyway. Today, they've brought you something new, a concoction made from honey, garlic, and what they claim are healing minerals scraped from a sacred rock. You're supposed to swallow it slowly and believe it will fix everything from joint pain to divine fatigue. You nod politely while thinking that what might really help is a good night's sleep and a day without endless ceremonies. But of course, suggesting such a thing would shock the court. Pharaohs aren't supposed to need rest. They're supposed to radiate eternal energy. Even when they feel like collapsing, diet is another part of the so-called royal health plan. The palace healers insist that every bite of food you eat must be carefully chosen to keep your body in balance. Too much bread, they'll claim it makes you sluggish. Not enough figs, they say your divine energy might weaken. You start to notice that their advice changes depending on which noble family just sent a gift of spices or honey. One day they swear by pomegranate juice. The next, they're all about beer mixed with herbs. It's less about science and more about superstition. And perhaps keeping their jobs. When it comes to real illnesses, the treatments can be unsettling. If someone in the palace has a fever, the physicians burn herbs until the air is thick with smoke and insist the sickness will float away. For injuries, they smear mixtures of honey and moldy bread over wounds, claiming it will draw out bad spirits. You've seen these treatments in action, and while some people recover, others don't, which leaves you wondering whether the cures actually work or if they're just elaborate rituals to keep everyone believing in their expertise. You can't help but notice that, despite all the medical care, no one in the palace seems particularly healthy. The servants carry the scars of hard labor. The scribes cough from sitting in dusty rooms all day. Even the priests, who are supposed to be the purest of all, often limp or complain of stomach pains. It's a reminder that divine titles don't protect anyone from the reality of ancient life. Diseases spread quickly, and even a small infection can become serious. The thought lingers in the back of your mind. One illness, one poorly timed fever, and the kingdom would be scrambling too. Carve your name into stone while choosing your successor. Of course, no one would ever admit that a pharaoh can get sick. If you so much as sneeze, the priests will insist it's a sign from the gods, and the scribes will start writing about the heavenly winds of renewal. It's flattering, but also ridiculous. Sometimes you just sneeze because of the dust, and there's a lot of dust. Despite the questionable medical advice, there are rare moments of relief. A skilled masseur occasionally comes to work the knots out of your shoulders, using warm oils and slow, deliberate pressure. For those few minutes, you almost forget about the weight of the crown, the endless ceremonies, and the constant whispers. But then, of course, someone barges in with an urgent message about a temple donation, and the calm evaporates like water on hot stone. In the evenings, when your body aches from a day of standing like a statue, you sometimes sit in the palace gardens and just breathe. The scent of lotus flowers drifts through the air, and the sound of running water from the fountains soothes you in a way no physician's potion ever could. You look at the stars and think about how every pharaoh before you must have had the same aches, the same struggles, the same longing for simple peace. Perhaps that's why they built such elaborate tombs, not just to be remembered, but because the afterlife was probably the only chance they had to rest before bed. Another physician appears, insisting you drink a warm brew of dates, honey, and ground herbs to strengthen your spirit for tomorrow. You smile, nod, and drink it, even though you're not sure it does anything at all. maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe the act of believing you'll be strong is enough to keep you going. Still, as you lie down, staring at the painted ceiling, you can't help but think that being divine would be a lot easier if the gods had included a better health plan. The Nile is calm today, its surface reflecting the morning light like a ribbon of molten bronze. It's beautiful, yes, but also deceptive. Everyone in Egypt knows that the Nile is both a blessing and a curse. The very lifeline of the kingdom, but also a wild, unpredictable force. And as Pharaoh, you're the one everyone blames when the river misbehaves. If there's too much flooding, you've clearly angered the gods. If there's too little, obviously your divine favor is slipping. It doesn't matter that you have as much control over the Nile as you do over the weather. To your people, you are the weather. Today, a group of high priests gather in the temple courtyard, their faces heavy with concern. The annual flood is late, not disastrously late yet, but late enough that farmers are starting to worry. And when farmers worry, everyone worries. They rely on the floodwaters to soak the fields, to bring the rich black silt that will make their crops grow. No flood means no harvest. No harvest means famine. And famine, of course, means everyone will look at you with the kind of expectation that feels less like worship and more like blame waiting to happen. The priests suggest that a special ritual be held to encourage the gods' generosity. Special rituals are always their answer. You've lost count of how many ceremonies have been invented simply because someone decided the river wasn't behaving as it should. This one involves walking to the edge of the Nile, offering golden figurines, and reciting a long, elaborate chant while wearing an absurdly heavy headdress. You nod, pretending this makes sense. Because arguing with priests is like arguing with the wind, pointless and exhausting. As you stand on the riverbank, the smell of damp reeds and mud rises around you. The water glints in the sun, smooth and silent, as if it's mocking you. The crowd behind you murmurs prayers, hoping you have the power to summon the flood. You raise your hands, as tradition dictates, and the priests begin their chant. It's a low, rhythmic sound designed to feel like magic, though it mostly just makes you want to nap. You wait for some sign, a ripple, anything, but of course nothing happens. Nature doesn't work on command, even for a pharaoh. Later, back in the palace, the advisors gather to discuss contingency plans. They speak of rationing grain, of finding alternative trade routes, of quietly convincing the people that patience is divine. You sit there, listening to their endless debates, while wondering why no one ever blames the river itself. You're supposed to be the living bridge between gods and mortals, but even bridges have their limits. What's frustrating is that when the Nile does flood correctly, everyone thanks the gods, not you. But if something goes wrong, you become the convenient target. You can already imagine the rumors that will spread if the waters don't rise soon. Some will say you've fallen out of favor with the heavens. Others will whisper that perhaps another ruler could bring the river back to life. It's all nonsense, of course, but nonsense spreads fast when people are scared. That night, you wander out to the balcony, looking at the river glistening under the moonlight. It's quiet now. Too quiet, the surface like polished stone. Somewhere, you can hear the faint sound of frogs and crickets, the night chorus of the Nile. You wonder if past pharaohs stood in this same spot, staring at the water and hoping it would listen. Maybe they prayed, maybe they cursed, maybe they just accepted that. Despite the title of living god, they were still just another human waiting for nature to do its thing. The next morning, the priests organize yet another offering. More incense, more chanting, more gold tossed into the river. It's hard not to think that the river is probably enjoying all the free gifts, refusing to move just to see how much you're willing to offer. You keep your expression neutral, though inside you're imagining the Nile as a stubborn old camel, sitting in the sand and refusing to budge no matter how much coaxing you try. Days pass. The tension grows. Farmers gather outside the city gates, whispering prayers and looking toward the palace. You know they're wondering if you've lost your touch. You know the nobles are watching too, calculating how they might turn this into a chance to challenge your authority. And you know the priests are secretly enjoying their moment of importance, because nothing makes them more valuable than a crisis that can only be solved with divine intervention. Finally, after what feels like weeks of endless ceremonies, the rains upstream begin and the Nile swells. The water rises, slow and steady, spilling into the fields with that familiar, life-giving rhythm. The priests cheer and claim victory. The people rejoice, tossing flowers into the water and chanting your name. They say you've appeased the gods, that your divine will has brought balance once again. You smile, nod, and raise your hand like you planned this all along. Inside, you're just relieved you won't have to listen to another hour of chanting. That evening, as the smell of wet earth fills the air, you sit quietly in the palace gardens. The sound of water trickling through the irrigation channels is soothing, almost hypnotic. For a moment, you let yourself breathe, knowing that the Nile is, for now, your ally again. But in the back of your mind, you know this peace won't last. The river will always have the final word, and you'll always be the one standing there, pretending to control it. The Nile might be behaving again, but peace never lasts long when there are armies involved. This morning, your advisors file into the throne room with that grim look that only means one thing: trouble. Apparently, there are whispers of conflict brewing along the eastern borders. A few raiders have been spotted near a trade route, and now everyone expects you to step forward, like the divine warrior they imagine you to be. The reality is, you haven't held a sword in months, and your shoulders are still sore from wearing yesterday's ceremonial collar. War, or even the hint of it, means strategy meetings, endless ones. Generals spread maps across the floor, their edges curling like old papyrus scrolls. They point at tiny symbols, moving them around as if war is just a board game where the stakes aren't thousands of lives. You nod at their plans, trying to look like you've got everything under control. But you know the truth. Battles are messy, unpredictable, and exhausting. One wrong move, and you'll be remembered not as a god king, but as the pharaoh who lost everything because he sneezed at the wrong moment. Of course, you can't show doubt. A pharaoh must appear fearless, invincible, and ready to crush any enemy. That's why they hand you a ceremonial spear during these meetings, as if holding it will somehow make you more authoritative. You stand there, looking every bit the picture of divine strength, while inside you're thinking about how heavy the thing is, and whether anyone would notice if you leaned on it for balance. The pressure doesn't just come from outside threats, it's also from the court itself. Nobles love war, not because they're the ones fighting, but because it means they can gain land, wealth, and influence if things go well. They urge you to act quickly, to show the gods' power. Meanwhile, the priests insist on performing rituals to ensure victory, which means more days of standing in smoky temples while they mutter prayers and wave around burning bundles of herbs. You can't help but think that half the time, your enemies would surrender out of sheer boredom if they had to sit through these ceremonies. Then there's the matter of looking the part. Before you even consider stepping near a battlefield, the palace tailors insist on fitting you with the proper attire. Golden armor that glitters beautifully but is so heavy you can barely breathe. The helmet, shaped like the head of a falcon, pinches your temples, and the shield is more decorative than practical. You suspect it wouldn't survive one decent hit, but no one dares admit that to you. After all, the image of a flawless, invincible pharaoh is more important than reality. When the troops are assembled, you ride out to meet them. The chariots line up in neat rows, the horses snorting and stamping against the ground. Soldiers raise their spears, shouting chants of loyalty, and for a moment, you almost believe the illusion that you really are the unshakable god of war they think you are. But behind the fanfare, you see the nerves in their faces, the way their hands tighten around their weapons. They're just as human as you, just as uncertain of what's coming. The road to the border is long, dusty, and uncomfortable. Your chariot bumps over uneven ground, jostling you like a sack of grain. The sun beats down relentlessly, and every gust of wind carries sand that finds its way into your eyes, your mouth, and the folds of your armor. It's hardly the glamorous image painted on temple walls, where pharaohs are shown gliding effortlessly across the desert like gods carried by invisible hands. The reality is that your feet ache, your back hurts, and you'd trade half your treasury for a decent cushion. When you finally reach the borderlands, the tension is thick. Scouts bring reports of enemy movements, but the information is vague. A handful of raiders here, a suspicious camp there. You're expected to stand tall and deliver a speech to inspire your troops. Something about the gods favoring Egypt and the strength of its people. You do, of course, but you can't shake the thought that most of these men are just hoping to see another sunrise. The battle, when it comes, is chaos. Dust clouds swirl, the sound of shouting mixes with the clash of weapons, and the air is thick with the smell of sweat and fear. You don't fight in the thick of it. That's what the generals and soldiers are for, but you must be visible. You stand in the chariot, holding your spear high, looking every bit the victorious leader, while silently praying that the wheels don't break and dump you face first into the sand. It's not heroism, it's survival wrapped in ceremony. By the time the skirmish ends, you're exhausted. Victorious or not, the weight of it lingers. Soldiers cheer your name, scribes begin drafting poems about your bravery, and the priests claim the gods themselves guided your hand. You nod, wave, and smile, even though all you want is a drink of cold water and a bath that doesn't involve 5 servants watching your every move. The journey back to the palace is slower, heavier. Victories, even small ones, feel like they cost more than they give. You know the scribes will carve this into stone, the tale of the fearless pharaoh who defended Egypt's honor. What they won't mention is how your legs still ache from standing in that chariot, or how you spent most of the battle silently wondering if this is what being divine is supposed to feel like. A mixture of exhaustion, dust, and pretending you aren't terrified. Back in the palace, the celebrations begin, feasts, dances, and endless toasts in your honor. You smile, raise your cup, and let them believe you are every inch the hero they need you to be. But deep down, you know the truth. Being pharaoh means fighting battles you never wanted, carrying a burden you never chose, and somehow looking flawless while doing it. The drums of war have barely faded, yet your advisors are already talking about construction. Because, of course, nothing says pharaoh quite like building monuments the size of small mountains. You're told it's necessary, that each ruler must leave behind something grander than the last, something to remind future generations that you were larger than life. The reality is less poetic. It's endless meetings about stone, labor, and how to move blocks that way more than entire herds of cattle. This morning, You're taken to the construction site of a new temple. The sun is still low, but the workers have been at it for hours, their shouts and hammer strikes echoing across the desert. You stand on a shaded platform while an overseer explains how many men have been injured this week, how many blocks still need to be hauled, and why the ramp isn't strong enough to pull the latest shipment of limestone. You nod like you understand all of this, though in truth, you're wondering who decided that stacking rocks in the shape of a triangle was the ultimate expression of divinity. The workers glance up at you as you pass, their faces lined with dust and sweat. They bow, of course, but you can see the exhaustion in their eyes. For them, this isn't about glory or legacy, it's about survival. They haul stone under a sun so hot it could melt ambition, dragging sleds across the sand while their muscles strain and their backs ache. You're supposed to inspire them, to stand there like the living God they believe you are. But sometimes you feel like an imposter watching a play, where everyone else is doing the real work. The logistics alone are enough to give you headaches. You're constantly told how many tons of stone need to be shipped from quarries miles away, how many workers must be fed each day, how many oxen are breaking down under the strain of dragging wooden sledges. There's talk of hiring more laborers from nearby villages, but that means more mouths to feed, more grain to tax, and more whispers from the nobles about your excessive projects. It's a delicate balance between impressing the gods and bankrupting the treasury. The architects, meanwhile, are never satisfied. They argue over details so small you can barely see them. One insists the angle of the pyramid must be adjusted by a fraction of a degree, because it is what the gods desire. Another demands a new shipment of granite, because the current stone has unworthy imperfections. You're tempted to tell them the gods probably don't care about tiny scratches, but they look so serious, and so likely to tell everyone you're neglecting divine instructions, that you let them have their way. And then there's the question of your own monument. The advisors have begun whispering about your tomb, not because they think you're going to die soon, of course. They assure you it's just good planning, which is their polite way of saying, we need to start building now if you want to be remembered forever. The thought of planning your own afterlife residence while you're still alive is frankly unsettling. But it's tradition, so you nod, pretending to be interested as they describe how many chambers it should have, how much gold should line the walls, and what divine treasures you'll need to take with you. You're trying not to imagine your future self, mummified and tucked away, while tourists of the afterlife admire your neatly arranged belongings. As the day drags on, the heat intensifies. You watch as men haul massive blocks up ramps, their bare feet kicking up clouds of sand. The sound of wooden sledges scraping against the ground becomes a kind of harsh rhythm, almost hypnotic. You wonder how many years of your reign will be spent on construction alone. These monuments aren't built in months, they're built in decades. Some pharaohs don't even live to see theirs finished. You silently hope yours won't take that long. At midday, the overseers insist on a ceremonial inspection. This means walking the length of the site while scribes jot down every word you say. If you so much as comment on the angle of a shadow, someone will write that you've given divine approval to the structure. You're careful with your words, nodding here and there, offering vague encouragements like, the gods are pleased with your work. It's easier than trying to explain that the gods probably have better things to do than measure ramp gradients. By evening, you're back in the palace, covered in a fine layer of sand that clings to your linen robes. You sit down, exhausted, while your advisors excitedly talk about how the temple will stand for eternity, how your name will be carved into every pillar, how your greatness will be immortalized. You smile politely, though what you really want is a simple house with 4 walls, a roof, and no ongoing construction meetings. Later, as you look out over the desert, you catch sight of the half-finished pyramid on the horizon. It's impressive. Yes, but it also feels like a looming reminder of your responsibilities and of your mortality. Everyone says these monuments are about worship and legacy, but they're also about fear. Fear of being forgotten. Fear that without something carved in stone, your existence will vanish like sand in the wind. Maybe that's why the pyramids are so massive. They're not just tombs. They're giant, stubborn declarations that say, I was here, and I mattered. You take a deep breath, watching the sun set behind the construction site. The workers are still out there, silhouettes moving slowly in the fading light. You wonder if they think of you as a god, or just as the man who keeps them working from sunrise to sunset. Either way, you know that tomorrow, they'll be there again. And so will you. The topic of death hangs over the palace like an uninvited guest. You don't talk about it openly, of course, no one does, but it's always there, lingering in the corners of conversations and flickering in the torchlight. As Pharaoh, your entire life is spent preparing for the afterlife, as though death is not an end, but another royal duty waiting on your list. You are told that the afterlife must be planned as carefully as your reign, and that your tomb must be perfect, perfect enough to last forever, because if your spirit can't find its way, all this divine pageantry will mean nothing. This morning, a group of artisans and priests bring sketches of your tomb for your approval. The drawings are detailed and overwhelming, full of winding passages, secret chambers, and treasures stacked to the ceiling. They speak of gold masks, painted walls, and intricate carvings that will tell the story of your greatness. You listen, nodding at the right moments, but inside, it feels strange to plan a home you'll never live in, not while breathing, anyway. It's like picking out a new palace, except you'll be lying very still in this one, probably forever. The priests remind you that your tomb isn't just for you. It's for the gods. Every chamber, every carving, every trinket must have a purpose. They talk about the journey through the underworld, about the trials your soul will face, and the treasures you'll need to barter your way past the dangers. It all sounds poetic and terrifying. You wonder if the afterlife is really that complicated, or if the priests just want another excuse to build elaborate rooms filled with gold they can later admire. Then comes the matter of your body. The embalmers, those quiet, mysterious figures, insist that certain preparations must begin early. Not because they think you're close to dying, they assure you of your divine vitality, but because the process of ensuring your body lasts for eternity is, frankly, a lot of work. They talk about resins, oils, and careful wrapping as if they're discussing the world's most detailed gift packaging. You sit there, trying to look regal, while secretly wondering how much linen they plan to use. Probably enough to wrap an entire palace. The treasures are another headache. Advisors constantly debate what items should accompany you to the afterlife. A golden chariot, rare spices, enough food to feed an army. Someone even suggests filling one chamber with board games to keep your spirit entertained, which sounds less like a spiritual necessity and more like someone's odd idea of fun. You begin to realize that your tomb will be less like a final resting place and more like a very fancy storage unit. And then there are the curses. Every tomb, they say, must have protection, not from spirits or gods, but from mortals, grave robbers, to be precise. The priests propose inscribing ominous warnings on the walls. Something along the lines of, whoever enters will face the wrath of the gods. You secretly wonder if that actually works, or if future thieves will just read it, shrug, and take the gold anyway. Still, you agree to it. Because nothing says eternal peace like scaring people with threats you'll never be around to enforce. Visiting the construction site of your future tomb is an odd experience. It's quiet compared to the noisy temple projects, more focused, more secretive. The walls of the chambers are already being smoothed and prepared for paintings of gods, celestial boats, and the glorious journey you're expected to take. You walk through the narrow corridors, ducking slightly because they haven't finished raising the ceilings yet. It's eerie, knowing that one day these halls will be sealed, and you'll be the silent resident they all talk about. The workers here are different too. They speak in hushed tones, as if the stones themselves are listening. They work with precision, carving hieroglyphs that will tell stories of victories and divine favor. You can't help but notice how much of it is, well, embellished. According to these carvings, you've already defeated armies single-handedly, tamed wild animals, and brought prosperity with the wave of a hand. You think about pointing out that none of this actually happened, but then again, history isn't really about the truth. It's about the story people will tell after you're gone. As the day ends, you leave the tomb site with a strange mix of pride and unease. It's an impressive structure, one that will likely outlast every other building you've ever seen. But it also feels like a quiet reminder that your time here is temporary. For all the ceremonies, the gold, the titles, and the endless attention, you'll end up like every pharaoh before you, wrapped, sealed, and waiting in the dark while the living move on. That night, you lie awake, thinking about it all, about how much effort is poured into preparing for death while you're still alive, about how everyone treats it like a grand continuation rather than the final curtain. Maybe they're right. Maybe the afterlife is as magnificent as they say. Or maybe it's just another story. Another way of giving meaning to a life where so much is spent on ceremony and spectacle. Either way, you know one thing for certain. When your time comes, your tomb will be perfect. Because it has to be. The word immortality gets thrown around a lot when you're pharaoh. Every priest, every scribe, every advisor tells you that your name will live forever. Carved into stone, painted on temple walls, whispered in prayers long after you've gone. It sounds comforting, at least at first. But the longer you wear the crown, the more you realize that immortality is less about living forever and more about carrying a burden that never really lifts. You're expected to be flawless, not just for now, but for eternity. One mistake, one misstep, and that's what will be remembered. Not the victories, not the temples, not the sleepless nights where you held the kingdom together by sheer willpower. This morning, you're handed yet another set of scrolls. These ones are official records of your divine accomplishments, carefully exaggerated to make you sound larger than life. According to these documents, you have personally blessed every harvest, led every victory, and invented at least 2 new methods of pleasing the gods. You know it's all part of the narrative. But it's strange reading a version of yourself that barely resembles reality. The man on these scrolls isn't tired, or human, or prone to the occasional bad mood when the bread is stale. He's a legend, a god wrapped in linen and gold. The artists are just as relentless. They want you to sit for more carvings, poses of strength, wisdom, and eternal youth. They smooth away any hint of age, etching your face with perfect lines and sharp features that you haven't actually possessed since your early 20s. Every painting shows you taller, stronger, and somehow glowing like the sun itself. You don't argue. After all, no one wants to see a tired pharaoh. The illusion is everything. Still, You can't help but wonder how much of this immortality is real. Stone can crumble, paint can fade, even the grandest pyramids can be swallowed by sand. You've seen what time does to monuments. One day, maybe centuries from now, your name might be buried under the desert, your face chipped away by wind and weather. The thought is both sobering and oddly freeing. If nothing lasts forever, maybe you don't have to carry the weight of perfection so tightly. Later, as you walk through the temple corridors, you pass walls filled with the names of rulers long gone. Some of them you barely remember from the stories told to you as a child. Their titles sound grand, their achievements legendary, but they're just names now, carved into stone-like messages no one really reads anymore. It's strange to think that someday you'll join them, a collection of symbols on a wall, remembered only through the stories people decide to tell. The priests assure you that immortality isn't just about monuments, it's about the soul, the afterlife, the eternal journey that awaits. They say that if you've lived rightly and built the proper legacy, you will be reborn in the field of reeds, where life is perfect and the Nile flows forever. It sounds nice, but a part of you wonders if even in the afterlife, someone will still be asking you to bless the crops. By evening, a celebration is held in your honor, another feast, another performance meant to remind everyone of your divine role. The musicians play, the dancers whirl, and the nobles toast to your everlasting glory. You smile, raise your cup, and pretend to enjoy the endless speeches. But behind the mask, you feel something quieter, something heavier. For all the praise, for all the gold and ceremony, there's an emptiness that lingers. You've spent so much time being the pharaoh, the symbol, the god king, the immortal name, that you sometimes forget what it feels like to simply be yourself. When the feast ends, you slip away to the rooftop of the palace. The night sky spreads above you, full of stars that have watched every pharaoh rise and fall. The air is cool, and for once, no one is hovering nearby. You lean against the stone railing and let the quiet sink in. The stars don't care about crowns or temples or titles. They were here long before you, and they'll be here long after. Strangely, that thought brings you peace. You realize that immortality isn't about living forever. It's about moments like this, standing under the stars, breathing in the night air, and knowing that even if the world forgets your name one day, you existed, you lived, and maybe, just maybe, that's enough. As you head back to your chambers, the palace is still and calm. Tomorrow there will be ceremonies, advisors, and endless expectations. But tonight, for a few quiet hours, you are simply a person, tired, human, and content to let the world spin without you. The palace is quiet now. The last torchlight flickers against the stone walls, and the echoes of the day's ceremonies have faded into the night. You sit by the open window, the cool breeze drifting in from the Nile, carrying with it the faint scent of water and reeds. The world beyond the palace is still, resting under a blanket of stars that shimmer like scattered jewels. For a moment, the weight of the crown, the endless rituals, and the relentless expectations slip away. You are no longer a pharaoh or a symbol or a god. You are just a soul breathing beneath the same sky that has watched over countless lives. The soft hum of the night is like a lullaby, the distant call of a night bird, the gentle whisper of the breeze through the gardens, the subtle creak of wood as the palace settles into its slumber. Each sound blends into the next, forming a slow, calming rhythm, like waves lapping gently against the shore. You feel your body growing heavy, your shoulders relaxing, your thoughts slowing as if the night itself is carrying them away. In this stillness, you let go of tomorrow, the ceremonies, the advisors, The endless tasks, they can wait. For now, there is only the steady rhythm of your breath, the soft coolness of the air, and the stars overhead, watching silently as they always have. You close your eyes, imagining the gentle flow of the Nile beneath the moonlight, its waters gliding past in a quiet, timeless current. The world feels lighter here, softer, as though it's holding you carefully in its hands. Let the calm settle over you like warm linen, smooth and weightless. Let your mind drift through the cool gardens of the palace, past the silent halls, and out into the open desert under the endless sky. Every breath is slower now, deeper, and with each one, you sink further into peace. Nothing is required of you here. Nothing at all. Sleep well and good night.